Carrie Bradshaw, fashion icon, columnist, and eternal romantic. But beneath her glamorous lifestyle lies a woman constantly grappling with questions of love, identity, and freedom. What if we looked at Carrie's journey through the lens of existential philosophy? How would Jean-Paul Sartre, the father of existentialism, interpret her struggles with freedom, choice, and relationships? Jean-Paul Sartre's philosophy of existentialism centers around the idea that existence precedes essence, meaning that we are not born with a predetermined purpose. Instead, we create our essence through our choices and actions. Sartre believed that we are condemned to be free, which means that every decision we make is an expression of our freedom, but it also comes with the burden of responsibility. In today's video, we'll explore how Carrie Bradshaw's search for love, freedom, and meaning reflects Sartre's core existential themes. From her tumultuous relationships to her quest for independence, Carrie's life is a struggle to reconcile personal desires with the external pressures of society. Let's dive into the existential dilemmas that Carrie faces in a world obsessed with appearances. Carrie Bradshaw's personality and dilemmas. Carrie Bradshaw, the protagonist of Sex and the City, is a character defined by her love life, her writing, and of course, her obsession with fashion. Yet, behind the designer clothes and her witty commentary on New York life, Carrie struggles with some profound existential questions. She's constantly torn between her desire for love and the need for personal freedom. And perhaps most importantly, she's questioning what it means to truly be herself in a world that values appearances above all else. Carretian relationships and their impact, multicultural. Carrie's relationships are central to her existential journey. Her on-again, off-again romance with Mr. Big is perhaps the most iconic of all. Carrie's search for love seems to be her way of seeking meaning and purpose. But Sartre would argue that by relying on Big, or any of her relationships, Carrie is looking outside of herself for validation and meaning, instead of creating her own essence through her choices and actions. Her search for freedom and identity. Carrie's identity is intricately linked to her relationships. She defines herself through the men she loves, but each of these relationships also reveals her existential crisis. Carrie constantly asks herself, who am I outside of these relationships? What is my purpose beyond being someone's girlfriend or lover? Sartre's philosophy would suggest that Carrie is at odds with her own freedom as she struggles to define herself on her own terms. Sartre's core ideas, freedom and responsibility. At the heart of Sartre's philosophy is the concept of radical freedom. Sartre believed that humans are condemned to be free. We are free to make choices, but with this freedom comes an immense responsibility. Responsibility for our actions and for the way we define ourselves. For Carrie, this existential freedom is both liberating and paralyzing. She has the ability to choose, but her choices often come with uncertainty and self-doubt. Carrie's existential struggles with love. Carrie's relationship with Mr. Big is a perfect example of her existential dilemma. Sartre would argue that Carrie is seeking meaning and validation through her relationship with Big, but this is an external pursuit that prevents her from embracing her own freedom. She defines herself through her love for him, and in doing so, she sacrifices the freedom to define her own essence. Sartre might argue that Carrie is bad faith, living in a state of self-deception where she believes that her happiness is contingent on Big's love, rather than accepting the freedom to create her own happiness. Carrie is also often trapped by her longing for romantic fulfillment. Sartre would say that she is living for the gaze of the other, which means her actions are largely influenced by what others, especially Big, think of her. This diminishes her true freedom. Carrie spends years chasing after a relationship that doesn't fulfill her, constantly asking herself if she is enough, which reflects Sartre's idea of the other defining who we are. Freedom and authenticity. Carrie's quest for authenticity is another key existential struggle. Sartre believed that in order to live authentically, one must embrace the freedom to make choices independently, without the influence of societal norms. Carrie often finds herself caught between wanting to live an authentic life and the pressure to conform to the romantic ideals of her social circle. She seeks the freedom to be herself, but remains trapped in a world that often values romantic attachment and material success over personal growth. Her job as a columnist gives her a platform for self-expression, but even her writing becomes a way of mediating her own identity. Sartre might argue that while Carrie's column is a form of self-actualization, it still reflects her need for external validation. She writes about love, relationships, and identity, but is she truly living those ideals in her own life? Sartre would likely argue that Carrie is still seeking meaning externally, rather than embracing her own responsibility to create her essence. One of the key moments in Carrie's journey comes when she ultimately decides to move forward with her life, independent of Mr. Big. Sartre would see this as Carrie's moment of radical freedom, finally making a choice that isn't dependent on anyone else's expectations or desires. It's in this moment that Carrie begins to embrace the concept of existential freedom, choosing for herself, regardless of the social pressures to conform or the romantic ideals that have defined her so far. Carrie's struggles with identity. Carrie Bradshaw's journey is one of self-discovery. Early in Sex and the City, Carrie is defined by her relationships, whether with Mr. Big, Aidan, or others. But as the series progresses, she begins to redefine herself outside of her romantic connections. Her writing career becomes a significant part of her identity, and her friendships with Miranda, Charlotte, and Samantha play a key role in her journey to self-actualization. Carrie's development is reflective of Sartre's idea that we must embrace our radical freedom and create our essence through choices. Carrie's final decision to pursue independence and freedom, especially in her relationship with Big, signifies her acceptance of the existential responsibility to define herself. Carrie's relationship with materialism and fashion is another existential dilemma. Sartre would argue that while Carrie uses fashion to express herself, she often falls into the trap of defining her value by external material things. Her obsession with designer shoes and her luxurious lifestyle might seem superficial, but they also represent her struggle to reconcile her inner identity with the expectations placed on her by society. Carrie's ultimate choice to move beyond these superficial markers of success is a step toward existential authenticity. She moves toward a life that is more about living authentically and embracing the ambiguity of freedom, rather than adhering to external definitions of success. Carrie Bradshaw's story is a perfect example of Sartre's existentialism. Her search for love, freedom, and identity is an ongoing journey marked by struggles with external expectations, personal desires, and the pressure to conform. But in the end, Carrie begins to embrace her radical freedom, accepting the responsibility that comes with it and stepping away from the need for validation from others. Carrie's journey reminds us that existential freedom is both a gift and a burden. We are free to choose, but with that freedom comes the responsibility to create our own essence, independent of external pressures. Carrie Bradshaw may not have all the answers, but her story is a powerful exploration of what it means to live authentically in a world that constantly demands we define ourselves through others. What do you think? Is Carrie Bradshaw truly living authentically by embracing her freedom? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.